get by. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sand. And right now, I feel like 100 grand.
You are listening to Inspired Insider with your host, Dr. Jeremy Wise.
Dr. Jeremy Wise here, founder of InspiredInsider.com, where I talk with inspirational entrepreneurs and leaders. Today is no different. I have Anna David. I'm going to formally introduce Anna in a second. And I always like to mention other episodes people should check out of the podcast. And I have had authors like Never Split the Difference with Chris Voss, and you have also had him on your podcast. So people should check that out. Gino Wickman of Traction, The E-Myth with Michael Gerber, who wrote something very nice about your latest book, On Good Authority, and The One Thing, Jay Papasan, among others. So you should also check out Anna's podcast, where he talks about books and launching books and everything around books. So check that out. This episode is brought to you by Rise 25. At Rise 25, we help businesses give to and connect to their Dream 100 relationships. And how do we do that? We actually help you run your podcast. We are an easy button for a company to launch and run their podcast. We do the execution, we do the accountability and the strategy. And, for me, Anna, the number one thing in my life is relationships. I'm always looking at ways to give to my best relationships. And I found no better way to do that than to profile the people and companies I most admire and profile them and what they're working on, so everyone else can understand and share with the world what they are working on in their business and life. So if you have thought about starting a podcast, you should. If you have questions, go to rise25.com. Both John Corker, my business partner, and I have been doing it for over a decade, and it's the best thing since sliced bread. Maybe besides books, right, Anna? But we'll talk about that in a second. So today we have Anna David. She's a New York Times bestselling author of 8 books and the founder of Legacy Launchpad Publishing. She's been published in the New York Times, LA Times, Vanity Fair, Vice, Cosmo, the Huffington Post, and many, many, many more. She's appeared repeatedly on the Today, The Talk, Good Morning America, and numerous other programs. And she hosts a podcast. She's featured, like we mentioned, Chris Voss, Robert Greene, and many others. And you could check her out at legacylaunchpadpub.com, and also with one of her books on goodauthoritybook.com. Anna, thanks for joining me.
That was a very inspirational intro. You've given me a bunch of ideas for how I should be introducing my podcast. So you know of what you speak.
What are some of your favorite guests on your show? I mentioned Chris Voss. I mentioned Robert Greene. Who are some of your favorites?
You did mention my 2 favorites. They're the only episodes I have actually rerun. I was so thrilled. Chris Voss is a friend, so he had no choice but to come on. Robert Greene, it was just a thrill to get him. And he was just so humble and really went there and also complimented me a lot, which I got to say, that does make for a favorite guest. Call me shallow. They have.
Who do you want on as a guest that you haven't? From
Well,
an author perspective.
When you said Gino Wickman, I was like, oh, I wonder if he'd do my show. I'm sure any of your listeners know that what a Bible Traction is. I'm just doing nothing but name dropping, but Lena Dunham is, men never seem to know who she is, but she's a #1 New York Times bestselling author, and she created a show called Girls that all of us were obsessed with. When I say all of us, I mean women of a certain age. And I talked to her about coming on the show because, again, she launched a #1 New York Times bestselling book. But I really, business books are my passion at this point because I've seen what they can do for the authors.
Yeah. And I love to hear some of your favorite business books. You have an amazing, I want to encourage people to check out, it's going to be probably at some point on legacylaunchpadpub.com, but on AnnaDavid.com. It was amazing. We were talking about before we hit record, the page where it kind of just, it's a start here part, and it maps out from 1977 to the current, and it's pretty awesome what you share in there. And we'll talk about some of the experiences you had, because you've worked at a number of publishers. You've been traditionally published, but just start off, what are your favorite business books? What do you like?
Well, it's interesting because the reason that I'm so obsessed with publishing books a certain way is I like to sort of do the bizwar. It's sort of if a business book and a memoir had a baby, because I find a lot of business books kind of dry and boring, and I find a lot of memoirs incredibly fascinating, but they don't leave me with a lot of takeaways. So I actually have a thing where I read memoirs, the hard copies, and I read business books on my Fire, because that way I can underline the takeaways and email them to myself and actually implement them. But am I entertained? Would I call any of them a favorite book? No. Taken I've taken a lot from Alan Weiss's books, and I had Jay Abraham as a guest as well. And he's got this book, Getting Everything You Can Out of Everything You Want, something like that.
I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, there were a lot of, and I love Never Split the Difference also.
Let's talk about, we'll get to On Good Authority, but take me back in the past to the first book, and then the sequentially, what was the first book and then the next books after that?
So my first book was Party Girl, which came out in 2007 and was acquired by HarperCollins back when there was no such thing as custom publishing, or self-publishing was your weird uncle who had like the manuscript in his car, and you're like, what is this? This is so sad. And I will say, for many years, when people would say to me, oh, I published a book, I'd say, oh, self? And sort of raise an eyebrow. And I had no respect for them. I had it all backwards. Basically, I wrote 6 books for HarperCollins. I wrote Party Girl. I wrote another novel called Bought. Then those ones that you're showing, okay, these are actually interesting. So I did 6 for HarperCollins. Each one was more frustrating than the next. I will say Party Girl was acquired by the top publisher. It was this dream scenario. There was a bidding war over the movie rights. It all seemed so dreamy. And then that publisher was fired. And it was a crazy experience that happened, because she was Judith Regan. She was the most profitable part of HarperCollins, but there was the scandal. And the division was dissolved in a day. And so there was, even though there had been so much press and so much hype, and I was paid a good advance, the book sold horribly because there was no one there to work on it. And the movie fell apart. And it was this tragic heartbreak, because that's the best thing I've ever written. And the beautiful full circle story is that I was able to get the rights back 2 years ago and publish it under my own imprint, the way I wanted it published. And now the movie is tentatively scheduled to be shot this year. And I wrote the script. So it's definitely a lesson in having the long-term vision.
Talk about the movie for a second.
Well, it's been optioned over and over again. And at first I had all this power because it was very different. I live in Hollywood. So in 2007, options, they paid you good money. And they came to me and they said, because they won out the bidding war, I had CAA representing me, and they said, who do you want to write the screenplay? And I'm a Gen Xer. So I obviously said, well, the person who wrote Reality Bites. And so they went and they got her. And I couldn't believe it. And then the way Hollywood works is sometime the next year, I got an email from CAA that said, congratulations, your rights have reverted back to you. And I didn't know what that meant. So I emailed and said, what does that mean? And nobody ever wrote me back. And it meant that it was over. And what's funny about that is I wrote a story. I was writing for random websites, and I wrote a story about how that happened and how I never even knew, did they really hire the girl who wrote Reality Bites? I don't know. She saw it. Her name is Helen Childress. She reached out to me and she said, are you kidding me? They never even showed you my script. And she showed it. She sent it to me. So I had the very surreal experience of reading the script written by the woman who wrote my favorite movie, which was an interpretation of my life, a fictionalized version of my life. It was all so many levels of surreal. But that movie Sony put into turnaround. So it was optioned over and over again. And right now it's with people who have the money, which is really all Hollywood needs. So we have the money. It's got a budget of about $5 million, which is not a lot for a movie. And it's 2 friends of mine. It's a really crazy full circle story. The guy who was engaged to my college roommate, who's now a movie producer and money manager, is the producer of it. So it's all very weird.
That is wild.
Yeah.
I want to know what inspired you to write Party Girl. And if you're watching the video part, you'll see here's Anna and this timeline, right? It's pretty amazing to see. And we fast forward to Party Girl. What inspired you? Because I mentioned that because you were submitting things when you were a child and getting rejected.
Yeah, I was I
Here's a
really
rejection
wanted
letter right here.
from 1982. Yeah, I was a very ambitious little thing and I wanted to be published, and I saw in the Guinness Book of World Records when I was 6 years old that the youngest author was 4, and I found that totally depressing. And so I just kept submitting things, and I don't think I ever got published, but I would submit to like Highlights magazine. And then when I was
highlights.
highlights. It was a highlight of our childhood. It was in every, pediatrician's office. So then I went to college, and I was really, I was a bit of, I don't know if I should swear on this esteemed podcast, but I was
For
a
sure.
fuck up. I was a fuck up. I had a lot of fun. But towards the end of college, I learned that everybody else had a life plan and I did not. And so I quickly thought, I got to go get an internship. So I got an internship in a magazine where I started writing and became obsessed with working for magazines. So I did that. Then I really bottomed out on drugs and alcohol. And when I got sober,
there's a section right here that stuck out, and it's just like a one-liner, but it's pretty profound, right?
Yeah, I had forgotten what I put on this. But yeah, there was a lot of cocaine involved, and it was not a good time. And I get sober and I get hired to my dream magazine was Premiere Magazine. I just loved it so much. May it rest in peace, like all magazines now. And I get hired to write a column called Party Girl. And it was hilarious because here I was going, I went to the Oscars, I went to the Golden Globes, and they have me all dressed up as this party girl, and here I'm actually this very sober girl. And so it seemed like a great irony. And that was what I based my first book on. I fictionalized my own life.
Love it.
Yeah.
Talk about rejection, right? As a young kid, I don't know if most people would have just kept applying. I don't know if you even thought of it as rejection at that point. What were you thinking when you were submitting and not getting accepted? And, my daughters will probably watch this someday, and like a lesson in just keep doing it and keep getting rejected. It's fine. But how did you perceive rejection then?
It's a really good question. I don't remember as a kid how I perceived it, but I have a very weird relationship with rejection, which is to say, on some level, I'm 100% fine with it. I remember I really wanted to write for Details magazine, and I would send my what we called clips then. I would Xerox pages, of magazines that I had been in, and I would send them, and I was completely fine with never hearing from them. And then one day I get an email from the editor in chief, and he's like, "Oh, I like your stuff. I'd love to assign you a story." So that sort of surprises me, like when I look back on it, because I think that I like Hollywood and how they don't reject you to your face. I find somebody saying to me, "I'm so sorry we didn't pick you," the most painful thing, but not hearing back, I'm okay with. I don't know. So I do take rejection very hard. I had something happen to me yesterday that was a bit of a rejection, and I still feel it. Like I feel sad today. But I will tell you, the successful writers I know are not the most talented. They're the ones who kept going. So, I think that the only thing to do is to feel your feelings and then just keep going.
Where do you feel you get that persistence? Because there was almost like an inborn persistence in you from that.
I definitely don't know, because I wouldn't say my parents are like that particularly. I do not know. I've sort of looked to my grandparents, and I'm saying maybe I honestly think I was just born like that.
I want to talk about On Good Authority. And, we were talking before we hit record on you don't have to sell the most books to be successful. Talk about that.
Well, when I was in traditional publishing, it was all about the number of books you sold, and not only could you not control it, but really your publisher kept you in the dark about it. If you were me, you just constantly kind of got news that it was not going well, and you sort of felt like it was your fault. Um, Even though I had a New York Times best-selling book, I think that's a major misconception. People think, oh, if you're a New York Times bestselling author, you're rich. No, 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 no. I'm happy. I'm very open to talking about numbers. I made $75,000, which seemed to me at the time to be pretty great. But that doesn't last very long, particularly if you live in cities like LA or New York, which is where I've lived. Um, and and so we were led to believe that it was all about number of books you sell. And publishers, traditional publishers don't know anything about building a business behind your book. In much the same way that you and John have understood that it's not about the number of downloads to your podcast, it's about the relationships and it's about who is listening. So I often say I would rather have 100 people read my book and have their lives potentially changed and possibly reach out to my company to help them build their authority than to have 10,000 who aren't going to really care and not retain anything. So I think people really need to be sort of educated to the fact that it's who cares about the book sales, the numbers. You can't control that. You can control who reads it.
Love it. Yeah, and if you're watching the video, you can check it out on goodauthoritybook.com, and you're looking at the page here, and you could see Michael Gerber said some nice things about the book, and you have a lot of other wisdom with Jay Abraham and a number of other people. I recognize John Corcoran on here as well. Oh, there he is. On here as well. That's great. Speak to the specific path to building authority.
Well, the reason I'm so passionate about what I do is about 5 or 6 years ago, I started to meet people who were genuine authorities in what they did, and they were entrepreneurs. I think we live in a world today where there are a lot of people out there on TikTok and Instagram and doing the thing, and even on TV, who have spent their time building that and not the actual authority. And I realized that what made the difference between an entrepreneur and authority was a book. One of the things, although my books didn't sell well, one of the things that they did is they gave me authority. I published Party Girl, which was a funny novel about addiction, and suddenly I'm on CNN as an addiction expert. And I realized, wow, if people who actually had spent decades building authority around whatever it is they know, and all it takes is a book for the media and for event producers to start considering them an authority, then that's what I want to do. And I also realized it takes it brings in clients no matter what your business is.
Yep. I love it. You went traditional at first and then non-traditional. Talk about, because you were saying before, use the word frustrating, right? So talk about the traditional versus the non-traditional. Because obviously what you do in the company, Legacy Launchpad Pub, is not traditional.
It is not traditional. I find traditional publishing to be, frustrating doesn't even do justice to it. It is a process you have no control over. I had covers and titles that I absolutely hated, and I couldn't do anything about it. And I also, it really, I thought my first two books, there were no edits on it. So I thought that meant I was brilliant. What it meant was my editor was lazy, and I don't have any evidence he actually read my books. So it doesn't mean you're getting a quality experience. It is incredibly slow. It can take 2 to 3 years between acquisition and release. And the publishers are invested in getting more people. HarperCollins Publishing is not invested in helping Anna David attract an audience. They're invested in helping HarperCollins attract an audience. That's why they're paying for it. And so if you go the non-traditional route, you can do things like put a QR code in your book that people can scan and be added to your list. But to be clear, this is not because people who work in traditional publishing are evil. In fact, they're super nice people who are radically underpaid. The problem is, I think, with art and commerce, like we sort of get this idea that 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 it should be artistic and that it shouldn't be about building a business. They're in a business, just like any business. They've got to invest their money and their resources in someone like Glennon Doyle, who has a built-in audience, that and not someone who doesn't. And it doesn't make them bad people. It just makes them business people.
What are some of the mistakes people make when they're publishing their book? You mentioned like not putting a QR code. I mean, it could be little things or big things. What do you see that people are missing out on?
I think the biggest mistake people make, I think it's a blessing and a curse that anybody can go to Amazon and upload a book, because I think that people think sometimes, I'm good at talking, so I must be good at writing. In the same way that I don't go running into Cedar Sinai and try to operate on somebody because I have no training as a doctor. It's crazy to me that people who have no training in this believe they can do it because they've read books. So I think a lot of entrepreneurs also think, well, I just need to be a published author. And so they've heard all sorts of marketing plays. They've heard free plus shipping. They've heard just get like a 30-page thing out there. I think there's no point in doing it unless you're going to create a legacy book, something that you're proud to give to anybody, that best represents. If you've put 20 years into your business, you owe it to yourself to not do something that screams self-published. So they don't get help with the writing. I think one of the problems with editors is that anybody can say they're an editor. And so a lot of people come to us with books that are quote unquote completed and they're in terrible shape. And they say, well, I spent $5,000 on an editor. And I say, well, what best-selling books did that editor edit? Oh, I never asked. Again, not their fault. No one told them to ask. So I think that, what I'm constantly trying to do is educate people about how you have to get professionals. You have to know, you have to have realistic expectations. When I talk to a potential client and they say, how many books am I going to sell? I often say, I don't think you're the right client for us, because it's not about that. And if if that's your goal,
You're measuring the wrong metric.
Yep, exactly.
What stages do people typically come to you in? You mentioned sometimes they have it written, sometimes they don't. What's the kind of the shades that people come to you?
Well, it started as they just have an idea that they want to do a book. And then we had so many people coming to us with, quote unquote, completed books that we started to offer editing and publishing. I would say it's about half and half. The ideal is that they come to us with just the idea. It is, easier to start from scratch than to fix something that's been broken. So usually it's a 6-month process where they're paired with a writer. They go off. I'm a total snob when it comes to words. So my writers, they write for the New York Times. They're Wall Street Journal bestselling authors. They've all worked with me for a long time. They go off, and then usually in 3 months, they come back, and that's when we start putting it through the paces of really traditional publishing, which is the process I learned.
How often, when they come with something that's finished, do they basically have to rewrite?
About half the time.
Yeah. Is that tough for them, or some people like kind of know?
It depends. Sometimes they know. I think one of the things we run into, and you learn on each client and each book, but I think we had this customer is always right mentality for so long. And then I learned that actually can hurt the customer. I will say, just like side note, I used to go to Flywheel, the spinning place, and literally you could walk in and go, I can't find a parking space. And they'd go, we'll park your car. And I just was like, that is a customer always first mentality. I want to run a business like that. Well, guess what? Flywheel's out of business. And oftentimes a customer shouldn't be right. So if we would say, this title's bad, you should do this, and they'd say, well, I like it. We would say, okay, fine. Still, we have in our contracts, like we want them to have power, but we don't want them to hurt themselves. And so that can be a very delicate balance.
Yeah. Yeah. I totally hear you. Book launches, right? Let's talk about what should people do when launching the book. And I'll show on your page here. We have, someone's on the Today Show. There's bookstore events. There's CNN. There's launch parties. There's experiences. There's book signings. There's TEDx stages. Let's focus in on this bookstore event. And Dennis Rodman is here.
So I only have a business because a man named Darren Prince came to me in 2016 and he said, I'm a sports agent and I'm sober and I want to be a recovery advocate. And I said, that is super sweet. But I don't think it works like that. And he said, I want to do this book. And he because I had a New York Times bestselling book about addiction, he wanted me to write it. And I will not write a book for someone else. I don't want to do that. And so he was so insistent that I asked a girl I was friends with at the time if she would write it. And Darren said, as long as you edit it, I'm fine with it. So she writes it, I edit it, I hand it back to him. And he says, well, now I need it published. And I said, I know nothing about that. And he said, basically, I'll pay you to figure it out. And so we figured it out. And then he's a hustler. And what he did, and I think this is really smart, is he had spent years building up good favor. He, of course, was a prominent he still is, and celebrity agent. So he had put his clients like Dennis Rodman and Magic Johnson and Hulk Hogan on various TV shows. So he had relationships with those TV shows. And so he called in every favor that had been building up for decades. And he was able to get himself, on Tucker Carlson, on Jay Shetty, on Dr. Oz. And he also had built up relationships with rehabs. So the week the book comes out, he signs a 6-figure spokesperson deal with a rehab. And he starts speaking. At first, he's speaking for free. And then, it got $1,000 a gig, then $5,000. And I think he's up to $10,000 now. And, and he really took it and ran with it. And then he ended up starting a nonprofit named after the book. So it just took him to new heights. What I think is the most interesting thing he ever told me is, here his book is about addiction and recovery. It is not about sports agenting. And he said that every single interaction after the book came out, it went from being a business negotiation to being a sort of conversation between friends. So his business exploded, even though the book had nothing to do with his business.
I love it. Yeah, you could see here him and Dennis Rodman, Dr. Drew, I think that is, and Dr. Drew and Magic Johnson. You can even see that Magic Johnson wrote the foreword for his book.
Yeah. He's really tight with Magic. I met Magic. I have a picture of me with Magic. I also have a picture of me at Darren's launch party with Dennis Rodman, let's just say, kind of treating my head like it's a bit of a basketball. Like he's just enormous, and he's sort of got I should put that on the website too. But yeah, Magic Johnson wrote the foreword and was absolutely lovely to deal with, and really helped promote the book.
And talk about coming up with a title. Like, I love this. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of play on words, aiming high in this specific instance, but how was that hard to come up with? What's your process for thinking about the title?
Well, I was very new to it at that point. I am proud of aiming high. We batted a bunch around. And I do remember there was one, I can't remember what it was, but Darren said, I don't think Magic would put his name on a book with that title. I don't remember what it was. What's hilarious about that title is that we had a cover designer we were working with who we no longer work with, obviously extremely talented, but because the cover's gorgeous, but so difficult. And I remember he said, we should change it to whatever it said. We should add the word prominent. And it's the worst and the weirdest word to put there. And I remember that then, and that'll happen. The client goes, "Ooh, I like that." And I'm like, "This is a terrible idea." And now he's stuck with it. But with the title, your title is there to grab attention. Your subtitle there is there to break it down and to add keywords. So again, I learned on every book. Back then, I didn't know so much about keywords. Today, I would have addiction, I would have recovery, I would have words like that in there. The one thing that I do now, I don't know if you're familiar with PickFu. Do you know what that is? Oh, I love it. And I'm excited. I've just started working with them directly, where basically you can take, if you have 3 titles, you can go to PickFu, put in those 3 titles, pick your target audience, and they can tell you, you can get 50 people who have a, net worth of this or whatever it is, telling you which titles they like and why. And it's so cool. What's really nice is we work with some very analytical clients. So if we say we like this title better, they may go, my friend doesn't. But if we say 65% of people liked it better, then it has it has more of an effect. And I actually have a discount code for PickFu for anybody who wants it.
All right. You also have one for your book. I don't know if you want to mention that now.
Yes.
Mention that. And yeah, so on good authority.
Yeah, what I was thinking for your listeners only, I give bonuses for anybody who buys the book. It's $590 worth of bonuses, but your people, they don't even have to buy the book. You can just go to legacylaunchpadpub.com/rise25, and you will have to sign up. You can unsubscribe at any time. I will never know. But you'll get those bonuses just for you, Jeremy.
legacylaunchpadpub.com/rise25.
Yep.
Awesome. Thank you. That's amazing.
Yes.
Love it. I find that, these bonuses, what's an example of some of the bonuses for people?
We have a bestseller blueprint, which walks you through. So you asked for the launch. What's what's important? The most important thing to me, and a lot of my clients say that, is gathering what we call a launch squad. Anybody can do it. It's just it's like, herding cats a little bit. You get a group of people to agree to read the book ahead of time. What we do is we put the book on a site called BookFunnel, which allows anybody can go and download a PDF, download a Kindle version, read the book ahead of time. We say, write out a review, and then we guide them through the exact best time to buy the book. We'll price the book at the ebook at 99 cents, and we'll say, buy the ebook and paste your review. What it does is it helps the Amazon know the book is popular, and oftentimes it'll hit the number 1 spot in, a lot of times it's up to 10 categories, but at least 1 category. And then it's the social proof, like Robert Cialdini. We talked about favorite business books. That influence is one of my favorite ones. But it provides social proof. If you go to Amazon and you see something that has 2 reviews, you assume it's not very good. You see something that has 66 reviews, and you think, whoa, that's almost the devil number. No, you don't think that. You think, oh, that's a book people like. And it's not necessarily 5-star reviews. We don't, not only do I tell people, give me 4 stars. I prefer it. It also looks a lot more legitimate in this day of cynical viewing. Like, we're like, 5 stars, I don't trust that. But I always say, if there's something you think I could have done better, put that in there. But I think doing a launch squad is the single smartest thing you can do for a launch.
What else in the book launch should people consider?
I think you got to start thinking about your launch at least 6 months before. When we bring clients in, we have that conversation. Certainly if you're going to hire a publicist, you got to think about it. In terms of hiring a publicist, publicity does not sell books. When I was on Good Morning America, I had a 5-minute segment for my book, Make Your Mess Your Memoir. Went to Amazon, didn't really see a difference in terms of book sales, brought in hundreds of thousands of dollars in new clients. So it does pay off, but it doesn't, if you have a very clear thing you do, and that, let's say a client is worth $50,000 to you, then that's a lot more important than a couple book sales. So people need to know good publicists are expensive, and it requires a multi-month commitment for it to make any difference at all. And it's not going to sell books. But if you want to do a publicist, figure that out ahead of time. Right now, as we record, I'm still, my book is still a few months away from launching. And I'm so proud of myself because it's kind of the first time 6 months ahead of time, I started thinking about what are the bonuses I want? What do I want to do? I really just release books so that I can try out things. And then if they work, do them for my clients. You can buy a publisher's weekly review. People don't know that. They think you have to be traditionally published to get a review in Publishers Weekly. No, you pay. You're not paying for a good review. They may not like your book, but I decided I'm going to try that out. If it works out well, then I'm going to give that to my clients. So you organize potentials for bulk buys. Oftentimes, if you do want to make a lot of sales, if you have something you teach, you can go to organizations and say, hey, if you buy 100 books, I have an authority building workshop. And I already have somebody who has set out to buy, has already told me they're going to buy this. So bonuses for single sales and then bonuses for bulk orders. Also really think about the lead magnet. Like, what do you want people to do when they finish your book? Like the number one thing, if somebody finishes your book, the number one thing they're going to want to do is connect with the author. I shamelessly put in this book, please review my book. I put it several times because non-authors don't know how much an Amazon review means. So I think getting really clear about your CTA. I have a number of blurbs there, but in the end, I've never bought a book because of a blurb. So I had the time and the luxury this time to get blurbs from impressive people, but it's not required. So I think those are the most important things, but also corralling your people. What I'm going to do soon, and you guys, Jeremy may get one of these, is have my team send out an email that says, hey, how will you support Anna? Because people, you got to ask them. Will you send out a newsletter? Will you have me on your podcast? You've already done the favor. And really corralling your network so that the reader feels like your book is everywhere. I feel like I've talked so much.
No, I love it. I could just keep going. No, but those are all really, I love the, review the book, the lead magnet, the workshop, I think is brilliant, really encouraging not only bulk book sales, but like a further relationship with the company, right?
Mm-hmm.
I love it. Especially a company that, values and sees your expertise. And you mentioned, those clients who say, hey, how many book sales? And if they're really harping on that, like it's not a fit. Who is a good fit to work with you?
My favorite client is the one who comes and says, I can't write at all. It's the wrong client if they come in, they say, everyone's always told me what a great writer I am, but I've never written. It's the founder or CEO who has a way to generate revenue. I sort of always say I won't take money from somebody that I don't think can earn back 10 to 100 times what they pay us. It's somebody with a long-term vision who's not saying, well, what's going to happen the week my book comes out? It's somebody with something to say. But really most of the clients we turn down are people who don't have a business, who say things like, well, I'm putting together a course. It's very hard to earn back such a significant investment if you're selling a $200 course. It's a lot easier if you've got a high ticket offer.
I feel like we have very similar conversations in this realm because we have people say the same thing. Like, well, I'm starting, I think I'm doing this course, or maybe I want to do this. And we're like, I don't know how you're going to get ROI, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I love that. Let's talk. So we have Darren here, which we talked about. Love it. And I'll have to check that book out. And let's talk about Emily for a second.
Emily was our second client. So after Darren, I didn't really think this would happen again. I thought it was an anomaly, But I will say, this entire time I've had this business, we've never advertised. It has always been people coming to us. Emily reached out and said she wanted a book. And I thought, and again, wanted to be a recovery advocate. She had a big life in the multi-level marketing world, wanted to be a recovery advocate. And so we did this book for her. And she too is a hustler. She hired a publicist. She's on Today, Good Morning America. She's being quoted in the New York Times. She had a coaching, she still has a coaching business. Suddenly she had a waiting list for her coaching. And during the pandemic, she started this thing called the Sober Mom Squad that became huge. Then she's doing a TEDx talk. She just actually released another book, which she sold to a traditional publisher. So once that happened twice, I was beginning to catch on. I would say Emily and Darren really educated me as to what was possible.
There seems to be, and they heard your story and they really related to it from a recovery perspective. And there's a similar theme here.
Yeah, that we really started out attracting a lot of people doing recovery memoirs because I've been sober over 22 years, and I was always very public about my recovery. I've been called brave, but I had no idea it wasn't appropriate to talk about. I wasn't brave. I just was like, oh, I live in LA. I'm a writer. Everyone assumes you're an addict. So I just started talking about it. And I built up a name as a recovery advocate, going on the Today Show and doing TEDx talks and doing these things. So I did attract that audience. As time has gone on, we've emphasized memoirs less and business books more. And now it's sort of like I'm more known as somebody who knows about writing and publishing than I am as someone who's sober.
I guess being from Chicago, I didn't realize that was a stigma if you're a writer or whatever you just said.
Oh,
right?
come on. Hollywood writer. There are people who have, real jobs where if they work at a bank or something, their boss doesn't like hearing that they were doing cocaine all night.
I could see that.
Yeah.
Tamar.
This is actually an interesting story. Tamar is somebody who came to us with a completed book. And we didn't really like it. We didn't vibe. We talked. I'm like, she's like, and then I was brought to Tulum, which was really amazing, to speak at this GoBundance event about publishing a book. And Tamara was there, and we just bonded. We just had so much fun that it sort of became a no-brainer. She's like, oh, I'm hiring your company. It was interesting working with a friend because, and I've told her this, she wasn't the easiest client. But what we do for our clients on their launch day is we do different things. We were doing something then where we give them a cake. We find a local baking company, a bakery, and we have a cake sent to them with their book cover on it. The crazy thing that happened with Tamar is the bakery owner saw that she is releasing a book called, The Millionaires. And she hired Tamar. So before the book even came out, the baker hired Tamar
that's
as
amazing.
a coach. Yeah. And Tamar is like on the cover of Austin. She lives in Austin, Texas, Austin Monthly. And, none of these things, when she was just a real estate investor, nobody cared. But when she became a best-selling author of a book on real estate investing, then people did.
I want to be the first one. I have one last question, but I want to be the first one to thank you. And I want to point people to legacylaunchpadpub.com, or if you put a /rise25, there's a slew of bonuses. And I'm not sure if that gives you a 99-cent book or whatever it gives you. But go to it and check it out, because from what you've shared, there's gold in this, and there's so much more in the book. So people should check that out. And they can also, I guess we can send them to ongoodauthoritybook.com as well. The last question I have, and obviously you're a student of business books and a lot of other things. Who are some of your business mentors throughout the years, and maybe some of the advice they've given you?
Yeah. Well, Joe Polish is the reason I have a business. I got connected he too wanted to get into being a recovery advocate. My sister-in-law connected us, and he introduced me to, he opened my eyes to the fact that I didn't, that I could start a business. And he really, really helped me He's told me so many things. His main thing is, life gives to the giver. I've never known a more generous person. I've never had a friend who, no matter how I try to drag him down, he's never said a bad word to me about anybody. And I will say lately, well, my friend Marissa Friedman, I have a lot of mentors. And then I've just connected with this other Genius Network member, Dane Maxwell, who is helping me so much. Do you know Dane?
I've had Dane on the podcast a long time. Andy, Drish, and Dane I had on a long, long time ago.
Oh, he's so wonderful. And so I met him at a recent Genius Network event, and he said he was ostensibly just helping me with a course, but it's become so much more. So if you're open, you'll find the right mentor. I myself was not open for a long time. I think the main lesson I've learned about mentorship is you can't go to somebody and say, hey, will you be my mentor? You really, if you help people in a non-self-serving way, they'll just, want to help you.
Yeah. Dane's definitely a smart dude for sure. And I'm pulling up here. You could see this is, I don't know how long ago this was. This is when he was running the foundation. What is what did you see that? Yeah. What's he working on lately?
So I don't know if this is announced.
Okay.
Yet,
well, then don't say it.
But some really, really cool things.
Yeah.
I love that he was on this show.
That's great. I love it. Everyone, Anna, thanks for sharing your knowledge and expertise. Love it. Everyone check out legacylaunchpadpub.com. And then if you want to put the /rise25 for the bonuses, and just thank you so much.
Thank you so much. You were the best interviewer.
Thanks, everyone.
What I got, you can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sailing right now. I'm feeling like $100 grand.